was moments away from transferring my company to my son. My daughter-in-law handed me a cup of coffee with a warm smile. As the maid brushed past me, she quietly murmured, "Don't drink it. Please trust me." Without drawing attention, I switched cups with my daughter-in-law. 5 minutes later, everything began to change. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with my story until the end and leave a comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far this has traveled. My name is Evelyn Whitmore. At 64, I truly believed I had already experienced every form of disappointment life could throw at me. I was wrong. What came next was the most painful of all, wrapped in the harmless appearance of a family discussion on a quiet Tuesday morning in October, paired with polite smiles and a cup of coffee that was never meant for me to finish. For 15 years I had led Whitmore Industries after my husband Charles passed away suddenly from a heart condition. Taking his place was never simple, but I did more than survive. I transformed our modest manufacturing business into a company valued at $12 million. Not bad for a woman who once spent her days organizing fundraisers and hosting elegant dinners. My son Carlton, now 39, had been working at the company for 5 years. He wasn't extraordinary, but he was my child, and I believed that counted for something. His wife, Ever, joined us 2 years earlier as our marketing director. She was capable, charming when it suited her, and had a talent for making people feel chosen and special, including me. That Tuesday morning, Carlton called and suggested a family meeting at my home. He said we needed to talk about important changes regarding the company's future. His voice carried that carefully serious tone he used when he wanted to sound mature and responsible. He explained that he and Ever had been discussing long-term planning and wanted us all aligned. I agreed without hesitation. At my age, it was reasonable to think about the future. I assumed we would talk about timelines, preparation, and gradual transitions. I couldn't have been more mistaken. We planned to meet at 10 o'clock at my Beacon Hill home, where I had lived for more than 3 decades. The house still felt filled with Charles's presence, as if he might appear in the doorway at any moment. The living room, with its dark wood walls, stone fireplace, and shelves of family photos, had always been his favorite place. That morning, I followed my usual routine. Coffee first. Always coffee. I had been loyal to the same rich Colombian blend for years, ever since Charles introduced it to me on our honeymoon. Rosa, our housekeeper of 20 years, knew exactly how I liked it. She was quiet, dependable, and carried herself with calm dignity. She had watched Carlton grow from a careless college student into the man he was now. Lately, though, I noticed Rosa seemed uneasy whenever Carlton and Ever were around. She often found reasons to step out of the room when they visited. As I waited, I reviewed the latest reports. The business was thriving. We had secured 3 major contracts in 6 months, and profits were stronger than they had been in years. I felt proud of what Charles and I started and what I had continued to build on my own. Carlton arrived right on time, dressed sharply in a suit that likely cost more than Rosa earned in weeks. He had inherited his father's height and dark hair, though not his warmth. He greeted me with a quick kiss on the cheek, polite but distant, and said, Ever would arrive shortly with pastries from my favorite bakery. When Ever arrived 15 minutes later, she looked flawless as always, carrying a small pastry box and a coffee carrier with 3 cups. She greeted me affectionately, her embrace lingering just a bit too long. She explained she'd brought coffee from a new cafe, knowing how much I enjoyed trying different blends. I found it strange. Rosa had already prepared my usual pot, and Ever knew that. Still, I thanked her. She handed me the coffee in my favorite blue porcelain cup, the one that once belonged to my mother. She knew exactly which one I preferred. Carlton took a seat across from me. Ever sat beside him, angled so she could watch both of us. Her eyes moved carefully between our faces, as if she were measuring reactions. I took a sip. The taste was unfamiliar, bitter, with a strange aftertaste I couldn't place. Carlton leaned forward and began talking about the future. He said it might be time for me to step away from daily operations, that I had worked hard enough and deserved rest. There was something in his tone that suggested he already believed my time had passed. I told him I appreciated the concern, but I still felt fully capable. The company's performance spoke for itself. Ever smoothly stepped in, her voice gentle and reassuring. She praised what I had built and said they simply wanted to protect the legacy and ensure it continued the right way. As she spoke, Rosa brushed past me again, her eyes wide with urgency. That was the moment everything inside me shifted. "We've been working on some ideas for growth, new regions we could move into," Ever continued. As she spoke, I noticed Rosa moving restlessly behind her, dusting surfaces that were already clean, adjusting picture frames that were perfectly straight. She wasn't herself. When our eyes met, I saw something close to fear flash across her face. "What kind of growth?" I asked, taking another sip. The bitterness was stronger now, unpleasant, lingering. I wondered if the blend was simply too intense. Carlton launched into an enthusiastic explanation, talking quickly about overseas markets and joint manufacturing ventures. As he spoke, an unusual warmth spread through my chest, and my head felt light, almost unfocused. I told myself it was just the coffee and tried to concentrate. Ever was watching me closely. When our eyes met, she smiled, but this time I noticed something beneath it. Not care, not warmth. Something else. Expectation. "The thing is, Mom," Carlton said, lowering his voice slightly, "we'd need you to sign a few documents today to get everything moving. Authority transfers, updated agreements, that kind of thing." He opened his briefcase and placed a thick stack of papers on the table. "Our legal team has reviewed everything. It's mostly procedural." I reached for the papers, but my arm felt heavy, slower than usual. The warmth in my body intensified, and a wave of dizziness followed. "I'd like to go through these carefully before signing anything," I said. My own voice sounded far away. "Of course," Ever replied quickly, standing, "but maybe finish your coffee first. You don't look well." That was when Rosa appeared beside me with a tray of silverware she clearly didn't need. As she leaned over, she stumbled and bumped my arm. The cup tipped, spilling the remaining coffee across my lap and onto the floor. "Oh no, Mrs. Whitmore, I'm so sorry," Rosa said, dropping to her knees to clean up. As she leaned closer, she whispered, so softly only I could hear, "Don't drink anymore, please, trust me." The urgency in her voice sent a chill through me. In 20 years, Rosa had never acted this way. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable. "Rosa, honestly," Ever snapped, her polished calm cracking for just a second. "That was a full set. You know how important those cups are to Mrs. Whitmore." "It's all right," I said, though my thoughts were racing. Rosa's warning awakened instincts I'd relied on my entire career. "These things happen." Ever immediately lifted her own cup. "Here, take mine. You've barely had any and you know how you are without your morning coffee." But as she leaned forward to pour, Rosa stumbled again, striking Ever's arm. The liquid splashed across the table, soaking the documents Carlton had laid out. "Rosa!" Carlton shouted, jumping up. "What is wrong with you today?" "I'm so sorry, Mr. Carlton," she said. But when she looked at me, I saw relief in her eyes. As everyone scrambled to clean up, Ever went quiet. She stared at the stained papers, her face tense. When she noticed me watching her, she forced a laugh. "Well, this is unfortunate. Perhaps we should reschedule and get clean copies." "Actually," I said, feeling my mind sharpen despite my body's weakness, "I'd like to see them now." I watched Ever closely. Her disappointment was brief but unmistakable. Carlton hesitated, then nodded. "All right? Though they're harder to read now." As I scanned the pages, my vision slightly blurred. I noticed Rosa lingering nearby, pretending to organize the bookshelf while clearly listening. Then Ever reached for the coffee pot. Her hand was shaking violently. This was a woman who never lost control, never showed nerves. Yet she could barely steady the pot. "Ever?" I asked, genuinely concerned. "Are you feeling okay?" "I'm fine," she said quickly, setting it down untouched. "Just tired." But her face was flushed now, her focus slipping. She sank onto the sofa, pressing a hand to her head. "I think I need to lie down," she murmured. Carlton rushed to her side. "What's wrong? Should I call someone?" She tried to stand but couldn't. Her legs failed her, and she collapsed back, her skin pale, damp. "I feel strange," she whispered. "Everything's spinning." Rosa stepped forward then, calm and steady. I knew by the look in her eyes that she understood exactly what was happening. "Mrs. Ever," she asked gently, "when was the last time you ate today?" "Breakfast," Ever replied, her words slurring. "I feel so dizzy." Suddenly her body stiffened, then began to shake uncontrollably. It wasn't dramatic, it was terrifying. Carlton held her, shouting her name in panic. "Call for help," I said, though my own voice felt unreal. As Carlton scrambled to make the call, I looked at Rosa. She stood still, watching not with shock, but with grim certainty. And in that moment, as sirens sounded faintly in the distance and Ever lay shaking on my sofa, the truth became clear. The drink Rosa had spilled wasn't meant for her. It was meant for me. The trip to Boston General felt endless, though it couldn't have been more than 15 minutes. I sat beside Carlton in the back of the ambulance, watching the paramedics work as Ever faded in and out of awareness. Her skin looked gray, almost lifeless, and even with the oxygen mask in place, her breathing was shallow and strained. Carlton held her hand and kept repeating that she would be all right. But something about his voice unsettled me. There was concern, yes, but not the raw fear you would expect. It sounded rehearsed, controlled, like someone playing a role rather than a man watching his wife struggle. My thoughts kept circling back to Rosa, her warning, the careful way she had knocked that cup from my hand, 20 years of knowing her, and she had never once been careless. She handled fragile antiques and delicate china every day with steady hands and quiet precision. What happened that morning was no accident. At the hospital, Ever was rushed into emergency care while Carlton and I were sent to a waiting area that smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. The harsh lights drained all color from Carlton's face, making him look tense and unfamiliar. "I should call her parents," he said, pacing. "They'll want to know." "What will you tell them?" I asked, watching him closely. He stopped and turned to me. "That she collapsed at home and we don't know why." It wasn't the whole truth. The truth was that Ever collapsed after drinking coffee meant for me. Coffee Rosa had stopped me from finishing. The truth was that my daughter-in-law was fighting for her life because of something intended for mine. About an hour later, a doctor approached us, her expression calm but serious. She explained that Ever was stable for now, but her symptoms suggested exposure to something dangerous. She asked if Ever had taken anything unusual that day. Carlton immediately shook his head. Nothing unusual, just coffee during a meeting at home. "Where did the coffee come from?" the doctor asked. "From a new cafe," Carlton replied. "But my mother had the same coffee and she's fine." That wasn't entirely true. I had barely tasted mine, and even that small amount had left me dizzy and unfocused. Whatever it was, its effects had faded by the time we reached the hospital, leaving me clear-headed and deeply alarmed. The doctor explained that any remaining food or drinks would need to be tested, and that authorities might get involved if the exposure was deliberate. I noticed Carlton's jaw tighten for just a second before he nodded in agreement. After she left, Carlton pulled out his phone and said he needed to call Rosa to clean up the house before anyone else went there. "No," I said quietly. "We should leave everything exactly as it is." He turned sharply. "Why?" "Because if this was intentional, the evidence matters." He stared at me, and something flickered across his face. "Calculation." "You think someone did this on purpose?" he asked. "I think we shouldn't rush to conclusions," I replied, even though my own mind had already settled on one. Someone had meant to harm me, and Ever had taken my place. The only question was whether Carlton knew. When I excused myself, I didn't go to the restroom. I stepped outside and called Rosa. She answered immediately. "She's alive," I told her. And it wasn't thanks to that coffee. There was a long pause before she spoke. Then, in a hushed voice, she said there were things she had noticed, things she should have told me sooner. She asked to meet somewhere private, not at the house. Carlton had threatened to dismiss her that morning, and she didn't feel safe talking where he might overhear. We agreed on a small cafe a few blocks away. Then she said the words that made my hands tremble. She told me Ever had been adding something to my morning coffee for weeks, slowly, carefully. She said she had been keeping track and that I was in far more danger than I realized. The call ended, leaving me standing on the sidewalk, my entire sense of reality shifting. What I had dismissed as fatigue or stress suddenly made sense. Today wasn't a coincidence, it was meant to be the end. When I returned to the waiting area, Carlton was on his phone, speaking in low, urgent tones. I caught fragments. Things had gone wrong. There would be an investigation. He noticed me and ended the call at once, saying it was work. But I knew better. He had expected complications. He had been ready for outside involvement. I sat beside him and asked him to be honest with me. For a brief moment, the mask slipped. I saw fear, yes, but also resentment. I asked him how long he had been planning to take over the company. He asked what I meant. I asked how long he had been waiting for me to be gone so everything would become his. The silence between us felt heavy, almost tangible, as his expression shifted again and again, searching for the right response. Shock crossed his face first, then hurt, then anger, and finally something that looked almost like relief. "I would never want anything bad to happen to you, Mom." "You know that," he said. But the answer came too fast. And his voice had that same hollow tone I'd noticed earlier, careful and practiced, like lines he had already rehearsed. "I'm going to step outside for some air," I said, rising from my chair. "Please let me know if there's any update about Ever." "Of course," he replied. As I walked away, I heard him place another call. I couldn't hear the words, but the urgency in his voice was unmistakable. He didn't sound worried. He sounded desperate. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Rosa in a small, dim cafe filled with the scent of cinnamon and stale coffee. She looked far older than her 52 years, her face tight with worry and regret. "I should have spoken sooner," she said quietly. "At first I wasn't certain. Then I was afraid you wouldn't believe me." "I believe you," I said. "Tell me everything." Rosa pulled a small notebook from her purse and placed it between us. "I started writing things down about 3 months ago," she explained. "That's when I first noticed Mrs. Ever acting strangely." She opened the notebook. Every page was filled with neat handwriting dates, times, details. "Every morning," she said, "you sit in the living room with your coffee and the newspaper. For 20 years I've prepared it the same way, in the same cup, on the same tray. But 3 months ago, Mrs. Ever began arriving early on days when you had meetings. She insisted on handling the coffee herself." I remembered those mornings, Ever claiming she wanted to help, telling Rosa to rest. "At first, I thought she was just being thoughtful," Rosa continued. "But then you started feeling unwell on those days. Dizzy, weak, nauseous. You said it was stress, but it only happened when she prepared your coffee." She showed me pages listing symptoms, dates, and times. 3 months of quiet observation. 6 weeks ago," Rosa said, her voice trembling, "I stayed in the pantry and watched through the service window. I saw her take a small vial from her purse and add drops into your cup before stirring." My stomach turned. "When I saw it, I was terrified," she said. "Mr. Carlton had already warned me twice about asking questions. He said I was being intrusive. I was afraid that if I spoke without proof, I'd lose my job and never find work again." "So you kept records," I said. "I kept records," she nodded. "And I took pictures." She showed me photos on her phone. Ever in the kitchen, Ever leaning over my cup, Ever stirring, her face cold and focused. "This morning," Rosa added, "she used much more than usual. And earlier, I heard her on the phone with Mr. Carlton. She said everything would be finished today." My hands shook slightly. "So you made sure I didn't drink it?" "I couldn't let anything happen to you," Rosa said softly. "You've been kind to me for 20 years. You helped my daughter when she was ill. You paid for her surgery. You treated me like family when mine was far away. I reached across the table and took her hand. "You saved my life," I said. She squeezed my fingers. "There's more, Mrs. Whitmore. Things I learned about Mr. Carlton." She flipped to another section of the notebook. "He's met with lawyers about changing your will. He took out insurance policies in your name without your knowledge, and he's been moving money from company accounts into ones only he controls." The betrayal cut deeper than I was prepared for. He wasn't just waiting for time to do its work. He had been planning everything carefully. "How much money?" I asked. "At least 200,000 over the last 6 months, Rosa said. "Possibly more." 200,000. Enough to fund plans, silence questions, and hide intentions. "Rosa," I said quietly, "I need you to take everything you have straight to the police. All notes, all photos. Don't go home, don't call anyone." She nodded. "And you?" "I'm going back to the hospital. Once the test results come in, there will be questions Carlton won't be able to avoid." As we stood, Rosa grabbed my arm. "Please be careful," she whispered. "If he realizes you know the truth." "He won't do anything here," I said calmly. "Not in a place full of witnesses." But as I walked back toward the hospital, I knew one thing for certain. The danger wasn't over. "But Rosa," I told her before we parted, "after you speak with the police, don't go home. Stay somewhere safe until this is over." I walked back to Boston General with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The dizziness, the weakness, the confusion I had blamed on age and stress finally made sense. They weren't signs of decline. They were the result of something being given to me slowly, deliberately, meant to wear me down before one final step. When I returned to the waiting area, Carlton was sitting exactly where I had left him. This time, he wasn't alone. A man in an expensive suit sat beside him, posture stiff, expression polished. "Mom," Carlton said, standing up, "this is Davidson. He's our family attorney. Given what happened to Ever, I thought it was best to have legal guidance." The man extended his hand with a practiced smile. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm very sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. Carlton is concerned that your family may come under scrutiny." "Why would anyone suspect us?" I asked calmly. Davidson chose his words carefully. "If authorities determine this was deliberate, they'll look at everyone who had access to whatever consumed. Since it happened during a family meeting at your home, all of you could be questioned." It was a smart move. By bringing in a lawyer immediately, Carlton was framing the situation as an unfortunate misunderstanding, not a carefully planned act. "That's reasonable," I said evenly. "We should all be prepared to answer questions truthfully." Carlton and Davidson exchanged a quick look. I could tell they already had their version of the truth ready. That's when Dr. Martinez returned, her expression grave. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Whitmore," she said, "I need to speak with you about the test results." We followed her into a small room that felt more like an interrogation space than a medical office. "Your wife was exposed to arsenic," she said directly. "A significant amount. Without rapid treatment, the outcome would have been very different. Authorities have been notified." Carlton's face drained of color, though his voice remained steady. "Arsenic? How could that happen?" "That's for investigators to determine," the doctor replied. "With treatment, she is expected to recover, but she'll need close monitoring." Ever was alive, saved by timing, by instinct, by Rosa. As we left the room, Carlton immediately turned to Davidson. "What do we do now?" But Davidson was watching me carefully. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you have any idea how something like this could have ended up in what your daughter-in-law consumed?" It was a test. They wanted to know how much I knew. "I don't," I said calmly, "but I trust the investigation will uncover the truth." And it would. Rosa was already speaking to detectives, handing over evidence that would dismantle every story they had prepared. Carlton's phone rang. He stepped away, and I watched his expression shift from concern to panic to barely contained rage. When he hung up, he turned back to Davidson. "We have a problem," he said. "The police just detained Rosa for attempted murder." Davidson nodded slowly. "I suspected they might try to blame her. It's often the easiest explanation." But I knew better. Rosa wasn't detained because she was convenient. She was targeted because Carlton realized she had spoken up, and he needed her silenced. What he didn't know was that Rosa had been careful. Copies of everything existed. Soon, very soon, he would understand that what he believed was a perfect plan had become the proof that would end him. The police station felt like stepping into another reality, one where comfort and illusion disappeared under harsh lights. Detective Sarah Chen greeted me, calm and observant, the kind of person who could hear 10 lies and still wait patiently for the truth. I had come straight from the hospital. Carlton didn't know that I had already arranged legal support for Rosa. "Mrs. Whitmore," Detective Chen said as she led me into an interview room, "thank you for coming in voluntarily." "Detective," I said, "before we begin, you need to know something. Rosa Martinez did not try to harm my daughter-in-law. She prevented something far worse." Chen raised an eyebrow and opened a thick file. "That's a serious statement. Tell me why you believe that." I told her everything. The coffee, Rosa's warning, the deliberate spills, the notes, the photos. When I finished, the room was silent. "What you're describing," Detective Chen said slowly, "suggests the exposure was intended for you, and your daughter-in-law consumed it instead." "That's exactly what I'm saying." "And you believe your son was aware of this?" The words hung heavy in the air. "Yes," I said quietly. "I believe my son has been planning my death for months, maybe longer." Detective Chen continued writing in her notebook. She told me they had already spoken with Rosa and that her account matched mine in every detail. She hadn't come with just a story. She had brought proof. Photographs, detailed logs, even audio recordings of conversations between my son and his wife over the past 3 months. Hearing that made my hands tremble. I folded them tightly in my lap, trying to steady myself. Until that moment, everything had still felt unreal, like a nightmare I might wake up from. But now it was undeniable. For months, the people I trusted most had been quietly harming me while smiling at my table, while asking for my advice, while calling me family. Detective Chen went on. They had secured permission to search Carlton's home and office. What they found confirmed Rosa's notes. She laid several photographs on the table. Documents showing multiple insurance policies taken out in my name, totaling $5 million, all arranged within the past year. Financial records showing regular transfers from company accounts into private accounts controlled only by my son. And then she placed a small sealed bag in front of me. Inside was a tiny glass vial with a dropper. It had been hidden in Ever's desk at work. Lab tests confirmed it contained a highly concentrated toxic substance. I stared at it, stunned by how small it was. Something so insignificant-looking had nearly ended everything. "How long?" I asked quietly. Based on the amounts Rosa documented, Detective Chen said, likely another 2 or 3 weeks. The weakness, the confusion, the exhaustion I had been feeling weren't random. They were signs of something building slowly in my system. What had been added to my coffee that morning would have been the final step. The room felt suddenly cold. "What happens now?" I asked. She told me they would take my son into custody and formally charge Ever. With the evidence they had, the case was strong. Then she paused and looked at me, really looked at me. "I have to ask," she said gently. "How are you holding up? Learning that your own child was involved in something like this isn't easy." I realized then that I hadn't allowed myself to feel anything yet. I had stayed focused on details and procedures, but beneath that was a grief so deep it took my breath away. I told her about the little boy Carlton once was, how he used to bring me flowers from the garden, how after his father passed, he held my hand and promised he would always look after me. My voice broke as I spoke. "I don't know when I stopped being his mother," I said, "or when I became something he needed removed." Detective Chen listened quietly. She said that choices like his come from greed and entitlement, not from a failure of love on a parent's part. Still, something inside me had cracked, my confidence, my sense of safety, my trust in my own judgment. She told me I would need to testify later, and I agreed. Then she handed me her card and advised me not to return home for a while. The house would be treated as evidence, and until Carlton was secured, it wasn't safe. I nodded, knowing I never wanted to step inside that house again. Every room would remind me of what had been done there. I checked into a hotel downtown and paid for a full week. I needed space, silence, time to think about how to rebuild a life that had been quietly dismantled. The room was calm and neutral, almost empty of emotion. I ordered dinner and sat by the window, watching the city move on as if nothing had happened. My phone rang again and again. Carlton's name filled the screen over and over. I ignored it until late in the evening when I finally answered. "Mom, thank God," he said, his voice sharp with panic. "Where are you?" "The police searched the house. They're taking documents, asking questions, everything is falling apart." "I'm somewhere safe," I said calmly. And for the first time, I meant it. "Mom, this is all a terrible misunderstanding," Carlton said quickly. "That woman, Rosa, she's unstable. She's been feeding you lies. Ever would never harm you. We love you." "Stop," I said. The firmness in my voice caught him off guard. The line went quiet. "I know what you did," I said calmly. "I know about the insurance policies. I know about the money taken from the company. I know whatever was putting in my coffee. I know everything." Silence again. This one stretched longer. When he spoke, his voice was different. The panic was gone. What remained was cold and measured. "You can't prove any of that," he said. "It's your word against ours. Ever is the one in the hospital. If anyone looks suspicious here, it's you." "So this is your plan?" I asked. "You're going to accuse your own mother?" "I'm protecting my family from false claims," he replied. "Rosa was fired last year for theft. Did she mention that? She has every reason to want revenge." It was a lie. Rosa had never been fired. He was inventing stories on the spot, hoping confusion would buy him time. "I've already spoken to the police," I said. "Then you've made a terrible mistake," he snapped. "One that's going to destroy this family." "This family was destroyed the moment you decided I was worth more to you gone than alive." I ended the call and turned my phone off when it rang again. The next morning, there was a knock at my hotel door. Through the peephole, I saw Detective Chen holding a newspaper. "I thought you should see this first," she said, handing it to me. The headline read, "Local businessman arrested in poisoning plot." Below it was a photo of Carlton in handcuffs, his face tight with fury and disbelief. "We took him into custody around 6 this morning," Detective Chen said. "He's been charged with conspiracy, attempted murder, financial crimes, and insurance fraud." "And Ever?" "She's still hospitalized, but she's been charged as well. Her attorney is already discussing a plea." I set the paper aside. Seeing my son on the front page didn't bring relief. It felt like mourning someone who had been gone for a long time. "There's more," Detective Chen said. "Rosa was released this morning. All charges dropped. The district attorney issued a formal apology." "Is she all right?" "She's shaken but strong. She asked me to give you this." She handed me an envelope with my name written in Rosa's careful handwriting. Inside was a short note expressing sorrow for everything I was enduring and gratitude that she had been able to protect me. She wrote that she would understand if I no longer wanted her to work for me, but that her loyalty remained. I folded the note and placed it in my purse. Rosa had never asked for anything except the chance to do her job honestly. She had risked everything for me, and I would never forget that. "What happens now?" I asked. "There will be a grand jury, then a trial. The evidence is strong. Your son is facing decades, depending on whether he accepts a deal." Decades. The child who once brought me flowers from the garden would spend the rest of his youth behind bars. Detective Chen hesitated, then added, "You should know he's hired a very aggressive defense attorney. He's known for shifting blame." "What does that mean?" "It means your son may try to portray himself as being influenced by his wife. He'll argue she was the driving force." The idea made my stomach turn. Can he really do that? He can try. That's why your testimony matters. You know his history, his relationship with money, his attitude toward control. Before leaving, she gave me a card for a victim's advocate. After she left, I sat alone in the quiet room, holding the card, realizing how much my life had changed. I wasn't just recovering from a crime, I was coming to terms with a betrayal that reshaped every memory I had trusted. Rosa's note reminded me that loyalty still existed, that kindness still mattered. My phone rang again, a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Whitmore," a smooth voice said, "this is Jonathan Blackwood. I represent your son. I was hoping we could talk before things escalate." "I'm not sure there's anything left to discuss," I replied. "Your client tried to harm me," I said flatly. "Mrs. Whitmore, I understand you're emotional," the attorney replied smoothly, "but I believe you've been given inaccurate information about my client's role. Carlton loves you deeply. He's devastated that you think he's capable of something like this." His confidence made my jaw tighten, but I stayed on the line. "What I'm suggesting," he continued, "is a conversation. Just you, me, and Carlton. A chance for you to hear his side before you make any final decisions about testifying." "Mr. Blackwood," I said calmly, "Carlton has already had many chances to tell me the truth. Every time, he chose deception." "Family situations are complex," he replied. "People make poor decisions under pressure. That doesn't make them—" "No," I cut in. "But slowly harming someone over months, stealing from them, and preparing to benefit financially from their death does." I ended the call before he could respond. I knew then this was only the beginning. Carlton had hired someone formidable, which meant he intended to fight with everything he had. I just didn't know yet if I had the strength to fight back. 3 weeks later, I sat in the district attorney's office listening to my son's voice plan my end. A small speaker on the desk played recordings Rosa had captured. Each word felt like a blow. "She's getting suspicious," Carlton's voice said. "Rosa keeps watching Ever in the kitchen, and Mom asked if her coffee tastes different." Ever laughed softly, as if they were discussing weekend plans. "Relax, we're almost there. Another week or two, and she'll be too weak to question anything. Then we finish it, and it looks natural. Too much stress, a tired heart." I closed my eyes, but I couldn't escape the sound of her voice speaking about my life so casually. "Are you sure it won't be detected?" Carlton asked. "Only if someone is looking very closely," Ever replied. "She's 64, overworked, tired. It'll make sense to everyone." The recording stopped. The district attorney watched me carefully. "I know this is hard to hear," she said gently. "This was recorded 6 days before the incident." I nodded, unable to speak. Rosa had been quietly documenting everything for over a month. Conversations she overheard while cleaning, serving meals, moving through the house unnoticed. The woman I had trusted for years had protected me with more courage than anyone else in my life. "There's more," the attorney said. She played another recording from 2 weeks earlier. "I can't wait until she's gone," Ever said sharply. She questioned me about reports today, like I'd take something that isn't mine. Carlton laughed. "That's rich, considering we've already moved over 300,000. 300,000. More than we first realized. Once she's gone, we cut staff, move production, sell off assets," Carlton continued. "The company's worth more dismantled than alive." "And Rosa goes first," Ever added. "She watches me like she knows something." I felt sick. "They plan to erase everything you built," the attorney said quietly. "Jobs, partnerships, charitable commitments, all of it." One final recording played, captured just days before the incident. "I'm tired of waiting," Ever complained. "Can't we just speed this up?" "We can't rush," Carlton replied, "but I like seeing her weakened. She used to control everything. Now she can barely get through meetings." There was satisfaction in his voice, not just greed, enjoyment. The recording stopped. "There's something else," the attorney said. "Your home security system captured audio in common areas. Several of these conversations were recorded independently. I stared at her. I hadn't even known audio was included. It means the defense can't claim fabrication, she continued. We have multiple sources confirming the same events. Then she handed me a photocopy. This was found in Ever's handwriting. It was a chart, a timeline, weeks marked with notes about fatigue, confusion, weakness, a plan tracking my decline like a project schedule. I looked at the page, realizing something chilling. They hadn't just wanted me gone, they had planned every step, slowly, carefully, and without remorse. Week 3 and 4 showed increased weakness and digestive problems. Weeks 5 and 6 listed confusion, dizziness, and weight loss. The notes continued week by week, all the way to 12, ending with a final entry. Last dose. Cardiac failure expected within 24 to 48 hours. She was tracking my condition like a science experiment, I said quietly, barely recognizing my own voice. District Attorney Sullivan nodded. Mrs. Whitmore, Ever has a background in chemistry. Before marrying your son, she worked for a pharmaceutical company. She knew exactly what she was doing. She documented everything because she wanted to refine the process. Refine it. The weight of that word hit me hard. We believe, Sullivan continued, that if this had succeeded, Carlton and Ever may have targeted others, elderly relatives, business associates. We found research on several people in your social circle, including medical histories and financial details. This wasn't desperation. It wasn't panic. It was calculation. They hadn't stumbled into this plan. They had studied it, improved it, and enjoyed the control it gave them. There's one more recording, Sullivan said gently. This one was made the morning of the incident, before Rosa intervened. She pressed play. You're certain about the amount? Carlton asked. Yes, Ever replied calmly. Based on her current condition, this will trigger heart failure within 2 hours. And it won't raise questions? By the time anyone thinks to test for anything unusual, it'll look natural. An older woman under stress. Case closed. What about Rosa? Carlton asked. She's just the staff, Ever said dismissively. Let her go the next day. She'll be too busy finding another job to ask questions. I love you, Carlton said. You think of everything. I love you too, Ever replied. After today, we never have to worry about money again, and we can stop pretending to care about your mother and her company. The recording ended. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air system. I stared at the speaker, trying to comprehend that my son had just praised his wife for planning my death. Mrs. Whitmore, Sullivan said softly, with this evidence, we have an extremely strong case. No defense attorney can explain away multiple recordings and written documentation like this. What kind of sentence are you seeking? I asked. Given the planning, the financial crimes, and the prolonged nature of the act, we're pursuing life without the possibility of release for both of them. Life without release. My son would grow old behind bars. Part of me felt that was exactly what his actions earned. Another part mourned the child he once was. There is one more matter, Sullivan added. Ever's attorney has approached us about an agreement. She's offering to testify against Carlton in exchange for a reduced sentence. I looked up sharply. Reduced to what? 25 years. She would be eligible for release later in life. And what does she claim? She says the plan was Carlton's idea, that he pressured her and convinced her you were planning to cut him out financially. The nerve of it took my breath away. Is there any truth to that? Sullivan asked carefully. None, I said without hesitation. My will has not changed in 15 years. Carlton was always my sole heir. In fact, I had been discussing giving him more responsibility, not less. Sullivan wrote that down. That aligns with what we suspected. If Ever's statement about his motivation is false, her request loses credibility. Are you going to accept her offer? I asked. That depends in part on you. I thought about the woman who smiled at me across the table, who measured my decline week by week, who laughed about my death with my own son. No, I said firmly, she was not manipulated. She was fully involved. She should face the full consequences. Sullivan nodded. "I'll inform her attorney the offer is declined." And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something steady inside me. Not relief, resolve. As I was getting ready to leave the district attorney's office, Sullivan handed me one last document. It was a victim impact statement. She explained that when the case went to trial, I would have the chance to speak directly to the court about how these crimes had affected my life. I held the form in my hands, wondering how anyone could possibly put something like this into words. How do you explain the moment you realize your own child values money more than your life? How do you describe the way trust collapses when the people closest to you turn out to be strangers? That evening, Rosa came to my hotel room to update me on the house and the company. She looked exhausted, older than her 52 years, worn down by weeks of stress and by the knowledge that she had been living inside something far darker than she ever imagined. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you. When I was recording Mr. Carlton and Mrs. Ever, I heard them talk about other things too. About you." "What kind of things?" I asked. She hesitated. "They mocked you. They laughed about how easy it was to deceive you. They said you believed every word they told you about caring for you and wanting to help with the business." My chest tightened, but I stayed silent. "Mr. Carlton would imitate the way you spoke in meetings," Rosa continued, "the way you worried about employees. Mrs. Ever would laugh and say you were desperate for their affection, that you would believe anything." The cruelty of it cut deeper than anything else. It wasn't just that they wanted me gone. They had held me in contempt while pretending to love me. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked. "I was afraid it would break you," Rosa said softly. "And I thought if you knew how much they looked down on you, you might give up instead of fighting." She was wrong. Knowing the truth didn't weaken me. It hardened my resolve. "There's more," Rosa said. "The police asked me to keep working at the house while they finished their investigation. Yesterday I found something in Mr. Carlton's office." She showed me a photograph. It was Carlton and Ever at an upscale restaurant, raising champagne glasses, smiling like they were celebrating something special. "This was taken the day after your last doctor's appointment," Rosa said, "the day you told them you felt weak and dizzy." They had been celebrating my decline. "Please give this to Detective Chen," I said quietly. "I want the jury to see exactly how they felt while I was suffering." Rosa nodded and put the photo away. Then she asked a question I'd been avoiding. "When this is over, when the trial is finished, what will you do?" I didn't have an answer. My son was gone, not just to prison but to something I no longer recognized. My company needed repair after months of financial damage. My home would always be tied to memories I couldn't erase. "I don't know," I admitted. "Everything I believed about my life turned out to be false. I have to build something new." Rosa took my hand. "For 20 years, you treated me with dignity. You helped my family when we needed it. Whatever you choose next, you're not alone." For the first time since this began, I felt something other than grief or anger. It was hope. Not that my old life could return, but that a new one, grounded in honesty and real connection, might still be possible. The recording showed me the worst side of human nature. Rosa showed me the opposite: loyalty, courage, quiet strength. As the trial approached, I understood their greatest mistake wasn't underestimating Rosa or overestimating themselves. It was believing that destroying my trust in them would destroy my faith in everything. They were wrong. 6 months later, I sat in the front row of Suffolk County Superior Court, watching my son being brought in under guard. He looked thinner, smaller somehow, stripped of the confidence he once wore so easily. His wife entered separately, her expression blank, her eyes fixed straight ahead. She never looked at me. The woman who once smiled across the table while slowly harming me couldn't face me now that the truth stood in the open. The trial attracted intense public attention. A case involving a mother nearly losing her life at the hands of her own family captured both shock and disbelief. I declined every interview request, but the courtroom was filled with reporters, observers, and even a few employees from my company who came quietly to show support. District Attorney Sullivan had warned me that the defense would try to portray Carlton as a pawn, someone misled and controlled by his wife. What I wasn't prepared for was how painful it would be to sit there and listen to my son rewrite our relationship as if it had never been real. In his opening statement, Jonathan Blackwood addressed the jury with confidence. He described Carlton as a troubled man who had fallen under the influence of a woman with technical knowledge and psychological control. As he spoke, I watched Carlton closely. There was no embarrassment on his face, no discomfort at letting someone else take responsibility for his choices. The man sitting at the defense table felt like a stranger. Blackwood went on to claim that Ever had fed Carlton fears about his inheritance, convincing him that his future was at risk. The prosecution immediately objected, and the judge instructed the jury to disregard the statement, but the implication lingered. The defense was trying to suggest that I had somehow pushed my son into what happened. The prosecution's case was precise and overwhelming. Detective Chen explained what investigators had uncovered. Medical experts described how close I had come to losing my life. Rosa testified calmly, detailing months of observations with quiet strength. When the audio recordings were played, the courtroom went silent. Hearing their voices discussing my suffering so casually changed the atmosphere entirely. Carlton's words echoed through the room as he praised Ever for her calculations. Jurors shifted in their seats. Some looked physically unwell. Any sympathy the defense hoped to inspire disappeared with each recording. The most powerful evidence came from Ever's own notes. Enlarged pages showed how she had tracked my declining health week by week, treating it like a research project. The prosecution made it clear that this wasn't impulsive or emotional. It was deliberate and prolonged. When the defense presented its case, they called people from Carlton's past to speak about who he used to be. Former friends, colleagues, even our family pastor spoke about a version of him that no longer existed. Their words couldn't outweigh what the evidence showed he had become. The defense then introduced a psychiatrist who claimed Carlton had been psychologically controlled. She suggested he acted out of fear and pressure. The prosecution's questioning quickly exposed the weakness in that claim. When asked to explain financial theft, recorded laughter, and expressions of anticipation about benefiting from my death, the explanations fell apart. The final testimony came from a forensic psychiatrist who had evaluated both defendants. He described a shared pattern of entitlement, lack of empathy, and absence of remorse. This wasn't one person leading another. It was a partnership built on shared intentions. As I listened, I understood something clearly. This wasn't a story about manipulation alone. It was about two people who chose the same path, believing they would never be held accountable. When it was time for the victim impact statements, I questioned whether I should speak at all. How do you put into words the devastation of realizing your own child wanted you gone? How do you explain the moment your entire life suddenly feels built on falsehoods? But as I stepped up and faced the crowded courtroom, I understood that my words weren't meant for Carlton or Ever. They were for the jury, for the people who would read about this case, and for anyone who might one day question whether they could trust the people closest to them. "My name is Evelyn Whitmore," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion rising inside me. "Carlton is my only child. For 39 years, I believed that bond meant something unbreakable. I believed that no matter what happened, we would stand together." I paused and looked at Carlton for the first time since the trial began. He stared down at the table, unable or unwilling to meet my eyes. For months, Carlton and Ever slowly harmed me while I trusted them completely. They took from my company while I included them in critical decisions. They prepared for their future while I planned to protect theirs. They joked about my decline while I worried about my health. As I continued, my voice grew stronger. The worst part wasn't what happened to my body. It was what happened to my heart. Every kind word, every display of concern, every moment that looked like affection was a performance meant to keep me unaware while they planned my end. I saw jurors wipe their eyes. Then Carlton finally looked up. For a brief second, I thought I saw something like regret. Maybe I imagined it. After his father passed, Carlton promised he would take care of me. Instead, he chose to abandon every value I tried to teach him. He didn't just try to destroy my life, he destroyed my belief in unconditional love. I took a breath before finishing. I am alive today because of Rosa Martinez, a woman who risked everything to protect me. She reminded me that loyalty and compassion still exist even when they come from unexpected places. Carlton and Ever tried to take everything from me, but Rosa showed me that there are still people worth trusting and relationships worth building. I looked at Carlton one final time. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because holding hatred would only harm me further. But I will never trust you again, and I will never minimize what you chose to do. When I returned to my seat, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not because my past had been restored, but because I had finally spoken the truth. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the verdicts were read one by one, guilty on every charge. Carlton showed little reaction. The outcome was inevitable. Both he and Ever would spend the rest of their lives behind bars. As the courtroom emptied, I stayed seated, absorbing the finality. The child who once brought me flowers was gone, replaced by someone I would never understand. Rosa stood beside me. "It's over," she said softly. "Yes," I replied, and I wasn't sure whether I meant the trial or the chapter of my life that had just ended. A week later, sentencing was finalized. I didn't attend. I had given enough of myself to that story. Instead, I spent the day with Rosa, walking through the house one last time before listing it for sale. Every room carried memories I could no longer live with. In Carlton's old bedroom, I found photo albums from birthdays, holidays, moments when everything seemed real and loving. I studied the smiling child in those pictures, wondering when everything had changed. Rosa stood quietly in the doorway. "Maybe it doesn't matter when it happened," she said gently. "Maybe what matters is what you choose now." She was right. I could spend the rest of my life searching for answers that would never bring peace, or I could focus on the loyalty and kindness that still existed. That evening, I made 2 phone calls that would shape the future I chose next. The first call I made was to my attorney. I asked him to create a charitable foundation in Rosa's name, focused on protecting older people from financial and personal harm, especially when it comes from those they trust most. The second call was to Rosa herself. "Rosa," I said when she answered, "I want to start a new chapter in my life, and I want you to be part of it, not as someone who works for me, but as my partner." There was a long pause, then her voice, thick with emotion. "Mrs. Whitmore, I would be honored." 6 months after Carlton and Ever were convicted, the Whitmore Foundation officially opened. Rosa became its executive director, and I served as chair of the board. We partnered with law enforcement, medical professionals, and social services to identify and investigate cases involving vulnerable older adults. Our first case came from a nurse who noticed a patient's health declined sharply after family visits. The second came from a bank employee concerned about unusual withdrawals from an elderly client's account. The third came from a neighbor who reported disturbing sounds coming from the house next door. Each case reminded me that what happened to me was not rare. There were others who used trust and affection as tools for exploitation. But every case also reminded me that Rosa was not unique either. There were people everywhere willing to stand up for what was right, even when it cost them something. The foundation became my new purpose. My new family. Not the family I was born into, but the one I chose. I never saw Carlton again. He wrote letters, but I returned them unopened. There was nothing he could say that would undo what he had done or rebuild what he destroyed. Ever passed away in prison 3 years after her conviction, following an altercation with another inmate. When I heard the news, I felt nothing. No relief, no sadness, just the quiet understanding that someone who caused harm could no longer do so. Carlton remained incarcerated. Sometimes I wondered if he thought about the life he had lost or the damage he had caused. Most of the time, I chose not to wonder at all. The foundation continued to grow, eventually serving older adults across New England and beyond. Rosa proved to be an exceptional leader. Her steady competence and genuine compassion made her deeply respected by staff and clients alike. On the 5th anniversary of the foundation, we held a dinner for supporters and volunteers. As I looked around the room, I realized something important. The people who tried to destroy my trust in humanity had failed. Their actions were answered by courage, their cruelty outweighed by kindness, their betrayal balanced by a community built on care and integrity. That cup of coffee meant to end my life became the beginning of something far greater. 10 years have passed since that October morning when Rosa saved me with a whispered warning and a spilled cup. I am 74 now. As I sit in my garden watching the sunrise color the sky, I can say without hesitation that these have been the most meaningful years of my life. The house where my life was nearly taken was sold long ago. I could not live among those memories. Instead, Rosa and I found a quiet colonial home in Wellesley, far enough for a fresh start, close enough to continue our work. Rosa lives in the guest house, though the line between guest and family vanished years ago. She is 72 now, her hair fully silver, her eyes still sharp. We share morning coffee every day, a ritual that began as caution and became a bond deeper than blood. The Whitmore Foundation has grown into a nationally recognized organization with offices in 12 states. We've helped bring justice in hundreds of cases, recovered millions in stolen assets, and built support systems for people who believed they had nowhere to turn. Rosa now oversees operations nationwide, though she still insists on doing her own grocery shopping and laughs at the idea of hiring help. "I know what happens when you trust the wrong people," she says with a smile that has never lost its warmth. Our work exposes us daily to difficult realities, but it also shows us resilience. I've seen people rebuild their lives in their 90s. I've watched individuals stand up in court with dignity and courage after unimaginable betrayal. I've seen those who had every reason to close their hearts choose instead to remain open. And every morning, as I lift my coffee cup, I remember the words that changed everything. "Don't drink. Just trust me." That moment didn't just save my life, it saved my belief in goodness, and that, I've learned, is worth more than anything money could ever buy. 3 years ago, we opened the Rosa Martinez Crisis Center, a residential place created for older victims of abuse who need safety while their cases are being investigated. When we revealed the sign with her name on it, Rosa cried and insisted she didn't deserve such recognition. "Rosa," I told her that day, "you spoke up when it would have been easier to stay silent. You put everything on the line to protect someone who couldn't protect herself. If that doesn't deserve recognition, nothing does." The center has since become a model for other cities. It's a place where people can recover while receiving legal guidance and emotional support as they rebuild their lives. Many of our residents are in their 70s and 80s, starting over after decades of mistreatment they never reported because they couldn't face the shame of admitting that their own children were taking advantage of them. I spend 2 days a week at the center, leading support groups and helping new residents understand the legal process. It's difficult work, listening to stories that echo my own experience of betrayal and manipulation. But it's also deeply healing, turning pain into purpose by helping others find clarity and strength. Last month, we helped a 78-year-old woman named Margaret. Her son had been forging her signature on checks for over a year. When she confronted him, he convinced her she was becoming forgetful and couldn't trust her own memory. For months, she lived in confusion and self-doubt until a bank employee noticed unusual activity and contacted our hotline. "I thought I was losing my mind," Margaret told me during her first week at the center. "My own son kept telling me I was imagining things. I started to believe him." "That's how this works," I told her, thinking of the way my concerns had been dismissed. "They make you question your own perception so you stop trusting yourself." Her son was eventually prosecuted and sentenced. Margaret recovered most of what had been taken from her, but more importantly, she regained trust in her own judgment. 6 months later, she became a volunteer at the center, helping others recognize the warning signs. "I want them to know they're not imagining things," she said, "and that they're not alone." That phrase became our unofficial motto, "You're not alone," because isolation is the most powerful tool people like this use. They cut victims off from friends, professionals, and anyone who might ask the right questions. They create a world where the only voice the victim hears is the one causing the harm. The foundation has also become personal in ways I never expected. Rosa and I are often invited to speak at conferences for medical professionals, social workers, and law enforcement officers. The first time I told our story publicly, I was terrified. How do you explain that your own child tried to destroy you without sounding like you're asking for sympathy? But I learned that people need to hear these stories. They need to understand that abuse doesn't only happen in institutions or to people without families. It happens in beautiful homes, in wealthy neighborhoods, carried out by people with education and polished appearances. It hides behind concern and kindness. After one presentation, a nurse approached me in tears. She told me she had been uneasy about one of her patients for months. The patient's daughter attended every appointment, but something about their interactions felt wrong. After hearing our story, the nurse trusted her instincts. That decision led to an investigation that revealed the daughter had been taking her mother's benefits and threatening her with isolation if she spoke up. The woman was moved to safety, and the abuse stopped. One person listening, one instinct trusted, one life changed. That's how progress happens. The foundation has also brought unexpected friendships into my life. Detective Sarah Chen, who investigated my case, became a close friend and now serves on our board. After retiring from law enforcement, she joined us full-time, helping train officers to recognize signs of elder abuse. "My perspective changed because of your case," she told me once. "I used to assume concern meant innocence. Now I know that's not always true." We've built strong relationships with advocates, judges, and prosecutors across the country. What started as one painful story has grown into a network of people committed to protecting those who are too often overlooked. One of the most unexpected changes in my life came when Charles's sister Margaret reached out to me 5 years ago. She said she had been following the foundation's work and wanted to reconnect. "I lost touch after Charles passed," she admitted over lunch near her home in Vermont. "Carlton seemed so protective of you. I thought you wanted space." She had no idea what had been happening. When she learned the truth, she was heartbroken. "I keep thinking about all those years we could have stayed close," she said. "If I had been around more, maybe I would have noticed something was wrong." I told her what I now believe with certainty. Silence thrives in isolation, but healing begins the moment someone reaches out. "Maybe I could have helped," Margaret said softly. I shook my head. "Carlton and Ever were skilled at hiding what they were doing. They fooled me for months, and I was living under the same roof. Please don't blame yourself for not seeing something they worked so hard to conceal." Margaret now volunteers with the foundation and has become one of my closest friends. She represents a family connection I once thought I had lost forever, a living link to Charles through someone who loved him deeply. Her presence in my life has healed parts of me I didn't even realize were wounded. When she tells stories about Charles as a young man, or recalls family gatherings from years ago, she reminds me that not all family bonds are built on deception. "Charles would be so proud of what you've created," she told me recently as we walked through the foundation's offices. "He always said you had a gift for turning pain into purpose." I think about Charles often, especially when the work feels heavy or the scale of elder abuse feels overwhelming. I wonder what he would think of Carlton's actions, whether he would feel anger, heartbreak, or both. I wonder if he would understand my decision to cut Carlton out of my life completely, or if he would urge me to keep some form of connection. But more than anything, I believe he would be proud that I chose to build something meaningful from the ruins of our family's collapse. He would understand that Rosa and I have created a new kind of family, one based on shared values and choice rather than blood alone. Carlton remains in prison, serving a life sentence. For several years after his conviction, he wrote letters that I returned unopened. Eventually, they stopped. I don't know whether he gave up hope of reconciliation or whether something else happened. I've chosen not to find out. People sometimes ask if I feel guilty about cutting off all contact with my only child. The question used to trouble me. Now I answer it honestly. I feel no guilt for protecting myself from someone who tried to end my life. "He's still your son," a well-meaning acquaintance once said. "Don't you owe him forgiveness?" "I forgave him long ago," I replied. "Forgiveness means I don't carry anger or resentment. It does not mean I owe someone continued access to my life." That distinction between forgiveness and reconciliation has been one of the most important lessons I've learned. Forgiveness is for your own peace. Reconciliation requires genuine remorse and meaningful change. Carlton has never shown either. Even the few letters I glimpsed before returning them focused on his discomfort, his losses, his sense of betrayal. He wrote about prison, about missing his old life, about feeling wronged by Ever's decisions. He never wrote about understanding the harm he caused or acknowledging the damage he inflicted. Through the foundation, I've met many older adults who feel trapped in harmful family relationships because they believe obligation outweighs safety. I tell them what I now know to be true. Biology creates connection. Love creates family. When someone repeatedly chooses to harm you instead of care for you, they've already defined the relationship. This belief has shaped my own life. Rosa is my family in every way that matters. Margaret is my family through shared history and mutual choice. The staff and volunteers who work beside us are family through purpose and compassion. Carlton and I share DNA, but that alone does not make a family. He chose wealth over love, self-interest over loyalty, and those choices broke the bond long before any court ever did. As I've grown older, I've become more mindful of time and more deliberate about how I use it. The foundation is strong now, supported by capable leadership and clear plans for the future. Rosa and I have ensured the work will continue long after we're gone. I've also accepted that I will likely never reconcile with Carlton. That realization once filled me with sadness. Now it fills me with gratitude. Gratitude that I survived. Gratitude that I had the chance to rebuild a life rooted in truth. Gratitude that my later years are defined by meaning, connection, and purpose rather than fear. Last week, we celebrated the Foundation's 10th anniversary with a gala that raised more than $2 million to support our programs. As I looked around the room at hundreds of people united by a shared commitment to protect the vulnerable, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. A sense of completion. This is what my life was meant to become. Not just building a successful company or raising a successful child, but using my experience of betrayal and survival to help others move from fear to strength. Rosa and I often talk about what would have happened if she hadn't been brave enough to spill that coffee, to whisper that warning, to quietly gather proof. I would not be here. And beyond that, the hundreds of people we've helped through the Foundation would still be trapped in situations they felt powerless to escape. "One moment of courage can change everything," Rosa said to me recently. She was right. Her courage didn't just save my life, it set off waves that spread farther than either of us could ever have imagined. Every person we help is another wave, another life redirected towards safety and dignity instead of harm. This morning, as I finish my coffee and prepare for another day at the Foundation, I think about the woman I was 10 years ago. Trusting, lonely, clinging to family bonds even when they were quietly destroying me. That woman could never have imagined the life I live now, the fulfillment of work that truly matters, the calm of relationships built on honesty and choice rather than pressure or fear. Carlton tried to take my life for money he would never get to enjoy. Instead, he gave me something far more valuable: clarity. I learned what truly matters. Not blood ties or inherited wealth, but the courage to stand up for what is right and the wisdom to recognize real love when it shows up in unexpected ways. The coffee that was meant to end my life became the beginning of the most meaningful chapter I've ever known. Every morning, Rosa and I share breakfast. Every day, we help someone find safety and justice. Every time we choose compassion over bitterness and hope over despair, I am holding a cup that represents survival, purpose, and the power of good people to overcome harmful intentions. At 74, I feel more alive than I did at 64. At 74, I know who I can trust, and I understand why trust, when earned, is worth the risk. At 74, I know that family isn't defined by obligation or shared DNA, but by people who choose to protect and care for one another. The sun is fully up now, filling my garden with light. Rosa will arrive soon for our daily coffee, and together we'll spend another day working to make the world safer for those who deserve dignity and care. My name is Evelyn Whitmore. I survived an attempt on my life. I helped build something that protects others. And I am part of a family I chose, not one I inherited. This is not the life I once imagined, but it is exactly the life I was meant to live. And every day, with every cup of coffee shared in trust rather than deception, I celebrate the simple gift of being here. Now I want to hear from you. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever faced something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments. And on the final screen, I'm leaving 2 more stories from the channel that many viewers love. They may surprise you. Thank you for staying with my story until the end.